Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. Today, I have Nikolai Ray, who is one of my personal favorite when I go to conference and etc. to listen to him because his sessions always so enlightening. And also my one go-to in terms of how it's market going and asking for second advice. Nikolai is a founder and CEO of MREX, as well as a professor in real estate financing engineering at MREX College. He's regarded as one of the North America's leading expert in apartment investing with over 10 billion with a B in analysis, underwriting, and transactions. And Nikolai is also a educator, advisor, and speaker. He often, you can find him on some of the conferences that he goes to. Of course, during COVID, we don't see him very often because he resides in Canada and he speaks French. So if you went to his website, the first time I ever met him, went to his website, it was on French, so I couldn't read it, even though I'm Canadian as well. So welcome to our show, Nikolai Ray. I'm so glad that you're here, and it's a long waited for me to have you on our episode here.
Thanks, Elisa. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be able to talk with you as always.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to kind of get a little personal on our show today,
Sure.
and then really kind of get into some of the stories that you share. And I understood that you're like a really self-made. So I wanted to kind of get into a little bit of early of your story, how that all started. So one of the questions we always ask our guests to start the show is, tell us a little bit more the entrepreneur bug, and in terms of you grow up, who kind of made that big influence to you, or there are certain incidents that you can kind of share with us?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think there are a lot of kind of cool things to explore within that. Number one, probably the biggest thing that makes me an entrepreneur is my problem with authority and not liking being told what to do. and I've always kind of, I think as a child, I was always the kind of child that would always ask why, like nonstop, like so
Mhm.
much so that my parents would get just completely annoyed with me. And now I have a son who's exactly like me. So now I feel for them. But I think it probably comes from that, from the fact that just naturally my inclinations have always kind of to be like, to always question authority and question why things are.
Mhm.
Number one. Number two, probably my creative side. I come from a family of my parents were artists. My dad was a blues and jazz musician, traveling blues musician. So I actually, even though I'm Canadian, I grew up in Los Angeles in California, and pretty much lived all over North America, all over the U.S.
Mhm.
And probably I'd say the third thing is my family background
Mhm.
is has probably a lot to do with it, because I come from I'm Canadian, but my father was half Bengali and half British.
Yeah.
And my family in Bengal, in the northeast of India, was a very prominent noble family, because there's a caste system in India. And I had one of my great uncles is a Academy Awards Lifetime Achievement winner.
Wow.
They gave him the Lifetime Achievement Award on his deathbed in the early 90s. Satyajit Ray, who Apu in The Simpsons is based actually off of his works. Funnily enough, another one of my great uncles, actually, the boson in electricity is named after him. Satyendra Nath Bose, who was
Wow.
a Nobel Prize nominee with Albert Einstein, because they were working together on the boson and the Bose-Einstein condensate. So I think all of that kind of, as I grew up, as I became a teenager, as I became an adult, I was often trying to answer that question that you asked me, is kind of, where does this come from? And my conclusion is it's kind of a mix of all of that put in
Mhm.
together, that I think has just kind of made me into the entrepreneur that I am. My parents obviously supported me a lot in just doing me, and not trying to put me into this kind of you know square mold, and
Right.
allowing me to explore and be who I am. So I think that's probably where it comes from the most.
Got it. Got it. So kind of like a really encouraging parents kind of brought you who you are. Now, as I was reading your bio and as we personally talked before, you just have all these really fascinating stories when you grew up. You were ex-professional. I didn't even know you were an ex-professional hockey player.
Yeah.
But of course I should have guessed because you're from Canada. and the 3 times Olympic chief for human performance. But you also studied biomechanics at undergraduate level, and then also successful entrepreneur opening 4 company. So there's so much impact over here for our listener, because most of us kind of working in our boring daytime job, and then I wanted to see what's it like to be on the other side. Can you kind of walk us through that even though your parents didn't put you in a box, kind of growing up, but did you kind of went to college, went on a path of having a daytime job, and all that?
Yeah, I've never had a daytime. I've never had like a W-2 job or anything like that. I just, my obviously with a very eclectic family that I grew up in. I grew up quite poor in Los Angeles in a pretty rough neighborhood. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was the ghetto, but it was pretty much the outskirts of the ghetto. Kind of like if you cross the street, then it was the ghetto, pretty much.
Yeah,
So we were poor, but like just a little bit richer than dirt poor.
yeah,
So yeah, and my parents being, my dad was a musician, my mom was a theater actress. So in Los Angeles, essentially what that means is she was a waitress, right?
right,
Because everyone who's not able to make it ends up being a waitress or a waiter or something like that. So they were just plugging away. But my childhood was everything away from normal. It was just very kind of eclectic and open minded. And I fell in love with hockey when Wayne Gretzky got traded to the Los Angeles Kings
huh,
when I was living in LA in the early 90s. And at that time, hockey was too expensive in LA because I think there was only like 2 arenas in the whole LA, bigger metropolitan area. So my
yeah,
parents didn't have the money for that. So after the Martin Luther King earthquake that happened in '94, in January of '94, when LA got pretty messed up, we decided to move back to Canada.
mm,
School was getting kind of violent for me as a child. With all the gangbangers and all that stuff. So we moved back to Montreal, to Quebec City, actually, and it was my chance to play hockey. So from that point on, from the age of 10, all I wanted to do was play hockey. Like
right,
that's all I wanted to do was play in the NHL. And luckily, my parents also made sure that I always, kept my education up
mhm,
because, the career of a professional ice hockey player is in average only a year and a half, and the chances of making it is like zero, pretty much.
right,
So I was always a very smart child. I was always probably, if you would have tested me on like an IQ test when I was like 10, I probably would have already scored, over 125, 130.
mhm.
So I was very strong in math and science, having that Indian background, obviously. and, uh, and yeah, so till the age of 22, I ended up becoming a professional ice hockey player. Didn't quite make it to the NHL. A bit of bad luck, couple bad injuries, just timing, And at 22, decided, hey, what am I going to do now with my life? I had at that time managed to study in biomechanics at university while playing hockey. So I went and did a postgraduate studies at Harvard for the time of a summer in preventive medicine, and then ended up, pretty much just launching my business in that area. And it was a way for me to transition out of my hockey career and my athletic career, because the transition from professional athlete to kind of
Right,
normal person is a very, very documented, hard transition to make.
right,
So I think that's kind of why I tried to stay kind of in the sports area professionally, and
mhm,
had a lot of success quite rapidly. Ended up going to the Olympics 3 times as chief of human performance for Canadian Olympic teams. But my real passion as I was getting older, I always knew was math, and even more so finance.
right,
So that's kind of where I just eventually went into the world of real estate, and real estate has just been an amazing passion for me because there's really there's no limit to what you can learn and what you can do and what you can apply in real estate.
mm,
And that's where I've really made my niche in the multifamily world for the last 10 years. I've pretty much done it all, and I continue to keep on really pushing the envelope. And that's why eventually I've always liked sharing what I find. I don't like finding something out and just keeping it for myself. I'm a very
right,
kind of social person. So I think that's also what has made me as an educator, essentially, is that everything I find and discover and learn, I'm very excited to go and share it with other people.
Mhm.
So becoming an educator and a teacher in the real estate field was kind of, very natural for me as well.
Yeah, yeah, because there's so much unlimited things to kind of untap.
And
Um,
it's cool. It's cool learning something new. Like
right.
I don't get people who don't want to like become more knowledgeable. Like it's such a fun thing. I think it's good for your self-esteem. I think it's just a great feeling when you're like, oh wow, now I understand how that works. That like how cool is that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, that's a quite a bit transition from a kind of professional athletes to then, but you mentioned that's actually something I was going to ask you, which is how do you deal with the transition, but you answered it. But kind of staying somewhat close to the arena of
Yeah.
athletes,
Yeah.
and then kind of get into the biochemistry. And I'm guessing if I recapped it correctly, you probably then transition into startups because you mentioned you have opened 4 different businesses,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then
right when I stopped playing hockey, I mean, I actually started my own business in high performance sports because being a professional athlete, having that education as well,
yeah,
that college level education, uh, I needed to do something. So I said, okay, well, I'll start, offering athletes my services as a human
yeah,
performance coach, right? Doing biomechanical testing, strength and conditioning programs, and nutritional programs, and mental preparation and stuff like that. And that ended up creating 2 things: my Olympic level human performance career as a coach,
mhm,
and as well, I started a company that was pretty much offering all these services to 3 types of population: high level athletes, um, CEOs and entrepreneurs, and also insurance companies.
mm,
So that business actually grew quite a lot from the age of 22 to 25. I probably had like 75 employees at that time. I also started a hockey player agency to represent hockey players with one of my buddies who was a lawyer. And yeah, that's how I got into business. I didn't know I was getting into business. I realized it quite a couple of years down the road that, oh wow, I have these businesses now. I just didn't want to get a job, and I didn't want to be told what to do, and I wanted to do cool stuff. I wanted
yeah,
to build cool things. I see myself as a builder, more than anything
mm,
else. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. But as I had that success, I was in my mid 20s. I already had like a massive amount of success, and I wasn't really enjoying it that much. And then one of my businesses really failed, and
yeah,
that pushed me to think about like, why am I doing this, and what am I doing, and is this really what I want to do? And that's kind of where eventually my aim fell upon finance, and then more precisely real estate finance.
mhm,
And then that's where my second part of my career started. I started a real estate investment banking firm, and that once again grew like pretty much everything I've touched, just grew
yeah,
exponentially in a very short period of time.
yeah.
And yeah,
That's
that's it.
awesome. So you talked about the real estate financing. So let me kind of go back a little bit, and then we'll kind of move on to our real estate segment of the part. But you mentioned because you opened so many company from like just a startup. Would you categorize? Because one thing I really admire is you always have a very concise way to kind of describe things. If you're kind of thinking back on creating all these different ventures and etc., is there a formula that our listener can kind of listen to in terms of different stage of growth and what you found really challenging and then how you kind of overcome that?
Well, I think the number one
Or from
thing
like
is,
maybe from a first person startup, like
yeah,
you
yeah,
have
yeah.
yourself and then the next
I think
stage.
the number one thing is just number one is looking at a problem, and I think there are 2 ways of looking at that. There, so I mean, I like to look at stuff. I'm very in tune, and I think that's where you have to listen a lot and be very sensitive to what's going on, and try and see, what's happening in the market, and what could be done better or differently, right? So that doesn't mean you have to invent stuff. Like everyone talks about innovation. You could just say, like with my real estate investment banking firm, what I did was I looked at the multifamily real estate market and I said, okay, what's being done and what could be differently or done better?
Mhm.
And I realized that number one, a lot of the services transaction wise to real estate investors they're just brokerages, right? They're just real estate agents and brokers, essentially brokering deals. But there's no one really out there offering true uh, advice and services to small cap real estate investors. It exists at the institutional level,
Right.
where you have like a Green Street and all these different big institutions offering advice to private equity firms and stuff like that. But there's no one really offering a service, a boutique firm that would help you not only transact properties, but also help you advise on how to transact, what to transact upon, which properties to buy, how to model those acquisitions and do all that stuff. So I just kind of looked at the market and said, okay, how can, what needs to be offered and what can be done differently? And then do it and try it and then listen and try and, get the feedback of people and what do they think of your services and your offerings and whatnot. And then you just adapt towards that. So I think that's probably the best way. And in real estate, it's the same thing. Like I see everyone try to do the same thing. And I think sometimes I always see people try to do the same thing as everyone else, number one, which I think is a mistake.
Mm.
And number two, I see people who are not doing that and who just try to reinvent the wheel. And that's not necessarily a better thing either. Sometimes you just have to kind of look at what people are doing already and just kind of tweak it a bit.
Yeah, gotcha. And then on scalability, how did you like, when you grow a business from like a one person to 75 people, etc.,
Yeah.
like kind of different layers in terms of how you actually grow that business and things that you found extremely painful, but you wished you didn't.
Scaling a business is extremely painful.
Yeah.
I think if anyone thinks the contrary, I think they're kind of living in a dream world. I think you have to understand that starting a business is a hard thing, but I think it's a very doable thing. I think scaling it and especially managing that growth, the hyper growth, is a very, very difficult thing to do, and that's in my eyes where most people actually end up failing. And that's where the one failure that I've had in business in all my years, I say I've had 15 years of success and 15 months of hell. The
Yeah.
15 months of hell was managing that kind of hyper growth and
Yeah.
not losing it, right?
Yeah.
So I think managing growth is a question of number one, no matter what you do, it's going to be chaotic, and you have to appreciate that chaos and
Mhm.
embrace it. And in a world of chaos, I think one thing that comes to mind is that discipline equals freedom. And there's a great book on that. I think it was Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL, wrote that book. And I really believe that if you're going to be an entrepreneur and a real estate investor or a real estate investor, the level at which you can perform in chaos is what defines you as a success. It's like in sports. The greatest athletes are not the ones who are the greatest in practice.
Mhm.
They're the ones who are the greatest in the games, because games are chaotic. No matter how many times you prepare for a game, there's always something that happens in a game that you might not have expected or happens in a different way. And that's chaos. And the greatest athletes are the ones who are able to apply what they've trained for throughout that chaos. So I think in real estate investing and entrepreneurship, it's kind of the same thing. But in order to do that, you have to put in certain, a certain structure and a framework. And there's some really cool ones out there that I think that can help. I used at one point something called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish,
Mhm.
which is a system essentially to help you kind of. It's like creating an operating system for your business. And I think this can be done in real estate quite well. And there's also another system now that I'm looking at it even more. I think it's more of a modern version of the scaling up system. It's called EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool, really interesting system as well. So I think putting in certain systems, certain frameworks and structure to allow you to then have the freedom to perform well throughout chaos is definitely the way to scale up businesses.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. And so that's really great advice. And then in terms of hiring, do you also have advices in terms of like hiring?
Hire fast, fire fast. I
Very
think no matter how, everyone thinks they're great at hiring. I think it's you never know. Like until you hire the person, you never know. So hire someone fast. Don't get. I used to go through all these like heavy, interview processes and stuff like that, and you end up putting all this time and effort and energy into hiring someone. The only way you'll know if they're any decent is by hiring them and letting them, do their job.
right.
And then you have to be really quick to fire them. Like the minute you have a doubt, it's, get rid of them. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it's a little hard, easily said than done. So it takes
Much,
a little
much, much easier. But yeah, it's easier to say that than to do it.
yes.
100%. Even after 15 years, I still have trouble doing it.
Right, right. So fast forward, kind of get into the real estate part of you actually came in at a kind of different position. What is your first acquisition like? I'm gonna ask that because you're coming from the financial background where most people will start from the landlord, like I'm
Right,
actually managing my
right.
single family,
Yeah. I
etc.
started much more as a professional. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think which is why it makes you really unique because every time we can talk to you, it feels much more conversations very institutional graded per se.
Right.
So let's talk about your first transaction or your first kind of acquisition in that manner. Yeah.
Well, professionally, my first acquisition that I worked on was an 8-unit apartment building in a pretty crappy neighborhood. So I mean, it was it wasn't the simplest of deals. The seller was an elderly lady. She didn't have any leases in place, so it was all like verbal monthly leases. So
Yeah.
you can appreciate the type of person that was living in that apartment building. Like one of the units, my business partner, like he had to leave. He had to like run out of the apartment unit and puke in the street because it was so disgusting. Because
Oh,
there were like 8 cats in there, and the lady didn't take care of the litter. So that was kind of my first professional experience in the transaction world, and it was good because, like you said, like obviously I've worked on very institutional level stuff, very high level stuff. I'm a very high level thinker, I think, but
yeah.
I'm also a very eclectic person. So I'm very high level, very macro, very theoretical and all that. But I'm also someone who grew up very poor. I'm someone who likes wearing jogging pants and can be on the field and can put on a pair of boots and get dirty. And I think that first deal also was very good for that because it really, it really sank in the fact that multifamily real estate, yes, can be very high level and institutional and theoretical at times, but it's also a very boots on the ground, very, pull your sleeves up type of investment.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about it because you have like the best of both worlds. You can be very sophisticated, very high level, but you can also, kind of, leave your computer, put on a pair of jeans and some work boots and talk to people and and get your hands dirty. So that's what I love so much about it. So that was my first deal essentially, um, as a professional. My first deal as an investor, I'd say, was very young with a couple buddies. I actually lent them a part of the down payment. So I don't really consider it my first deal because I didn't do much. I just pretty much underwrote the deal. The
Yeah.
first actual deal that I purchased myself was a 7-unit apartment building. Purchased it for $420,000, and it was essentially a crack house. And we put in about $700,000 in renovations into it,
Mhm.
and turned it into a beautiful apartment building now that's worth I believe like $1.5 million. So yeah, that's how those were my first deals personally and professionally.
Yeah. And then do you try to hold? I know you have a whole bunch series about this. Do you like buy and hold? So I'm gonna ask you general
Well,
questions.
because my real estate investing is not like I don't invest in real estate to like leave my W-2 job because I don't have a W-2 job. I'm an entrepreneur. But I don't invest either to not have to have my businesses work for me or so I'm not looking to gain any cash flow from my investments for my real estate. It's more of the reason I invest in real estate is number one, to kind of hedge against my entrepreneurial activities, which are very high risk.
Right.
So my real estate I consider is much less riskier, even though I do invest in very high risk assets, and I
Mhm.
do very heavy value add and opportunistic type of deals.
Mhm.
But I see it as a way to hedge. I see it as a way also to kind of, it's more for like my kids and for like for my legacy more than anything else.
Yeah.
Use that as a springboard for my kids eventually when they want to do it, once they become adults.
Yeah.
And also it's kind of like a lab for me because I see myself as much more as a professional. I'm a professional in the real estate investment world. I'm an educator. I'm a researcher. I'm a thought leader.
Mm.
So I think that's what sets me aside is a lot of people who do like I do, they're just theoretical, right?
Right.
They're just very institutional level. Whereas I'm actually doing small deals on my own
Right.
with my money,
Right.
risking that. So that allows me to kind of be kind of like what Gary Vaynerchuk calls the clouds and the dirt, where I'm
Yeah.
like kind of in both worlds.
Yeah.
So doing that it brings a lot of value to me because as an educator, as a thought leader, it helps my brain kind of associate the two things together and just be even better at sharing knowledge with other people and building, real estate companies and advising people.
Yeah, definitely. And then do you
By the way, there's some construction going on around here, so
oh,
talking
wait.
about being in the clouds and the dirt.
Exactly, right? And so have you I'm gonna have to ask this, which is like, have you ever kind of syndicated a projects or bring other people's money into the projects? And then how do you kind of treat these transactions differently than your own portfolio, like stuff that you
Yeah.
own yourself,
Well, I've worked with a lot of syndicators. I've obviously advised a lot of syndications.
right?
So that's one of the services I've offered in the past, where syndicators would come in, see me kind of act as like a kind of like a chief investment officer on demand.
Yeah.
Um, so and in my own deals, I haven't syndicated my own deals. I've brought on joint venture partners or a couple, silent partners here and
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So for me, I treat them all the same. Like I think that whether you're buying your own deals or you're joint venturing or you're syndicating,
Mm.
I treat it with a very high level of humility and respect.
Mhm.
And I treat it so that a lot of energy is put into making sure it's well structured. Now, if you're syndicating or you have joint venture partners, the difference is communication wise.
Mm.
Communication wise and risk management, where I think if you're using other people's money, your risk management has to be even higher because losing your money is one thing, losing other people's money is an even bigger thing.
Right.
And I think if you own your own properties, that's one thing. But if you have partners with you or investors, that level of communication is going to be so much higher and you have to over deliver. So I think that's really where the differences are, you
Right.
know, in those types of investments.
Yeah, that's well said. And in terms of structure, thanks for mentioning that. You're kind of the master of structuring the deal. Can you give us like maybe a couple examples where you see a value? Because nowadays people always say, "Oh, the price is too high. Should
Yeah.
you?" Even people start 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I know it's a very
10
passionate,
years ago, people would say the price
right?
is too
And then
high.
the price is too high. Should they wait? Right. So, how do you think about this? And can you give us like a one or two examples how different structure makes the deal kind of worth doing
Well, I
versus
think I think waiting is not investing essentially. So people who talk about waiting and they're waiting it on the sidelines, essentially what they're saying is they're not investors, right?
right?
An investor is someone who's investing and who's invested.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important nuance to underline. So so that's one thing. It's kind of like Bitcoin. Like I'll take Bitcoin, okay, which is kind of a weird kind of parallel to make, but I've bought Bitcoin at essentially every single price because I'm a Bitcoin investor, right? Some people call that dollar cost averaging, but I've bought Bitcoin at every price point. Now, same thing for multifamily real estate. Like if you've purchased multifamily over the last 10 years, you've essentially dollar average costed it, right? So, but the important thing is to invest because if you're not investing, what are you doing? Your money's sitting on the sidelines.
Right.
Ray Dalio has said it numerous times: cash is trash.
Right.
Inflation destroys cash, right?
Right.
So, and multifamily is an inflation hedge. So you should be investing. Now, the problem that you pointed out is price. People don't understand the difference between price and value.
Mm,
Price is not value. Price is not always indicative of value. And like a lot of real estate investors always use the kind of Warren Buffett, Benjamin Graham, value investing theory of buy low, sell high.
mm,
But that's misunderstood 99% of the times, right?
yeah.
Buying low, selling high doesn't mean that you can't purchase an apartment building at a high price, because price is not value. Price sometimes demonstrates value, but not always, especially if you're doing value add stuff and opportunistic stuff. I'll give you an example. I purchased a warehouse on a piece of land recently, last year actually.
Mm,
I purchased that for $225,000. No one wanted to buy that. It was on the market for quite a while.
mm,
And the seller was willing to finance the $225,000. So essentially, it's a no money deal, right?
yeah.
No money down deal. Now, if you look at that deal as is, it was way too expensive. It was probably $100,000 too expensive. I purchased it, put no money down. I then put about $60,000 down to tear it down, and then
Mm,
it cost me maybe another $15,000 in holding costs and architects and whatnot. And I went to this city, and I essentially got accepted a 60 unit. So I got the city to approve plans for me to build 7 6-unit apartment buildings on the piece of land. So 42 units.
mm,
42 units, the land essentially is now worth about $1.2 million.
wow.
So it cost me $300,000, $225 plus $60,000 teardown, plus $15,000 in soft costs, which was about $100,000 worth more than priced more at what it was worth at that time.
Mm,
But because of the intrinsic value of the land that no one else saw, but that I saw,
mm,
I essentially, purchased that land for $100,000 too much versus what it was worth.
right.
Its true value was way higher than that.
Right.
I essentially made $1 million, right?
Right.
I made
Yeah.
$900,000. So you
Yeah.
have to understand that value and price are two different things. And I think way too many people are getting caught up in price,
Mm,
thinking that price is value.
right. And then so in the market that's kind of saturated, let's just say someone's doing multifamily investing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what are some values would you say maybe some undercover value? Because we all know like adding washer and dryers, adding like just the standard stuff.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's like how can people make
Rubs and
it
stuff like that. Like
right?
everyone's done the rubs thing and
Yeah.
washer, dryer, internet, TV, stuff like that. I'm obviously much more of a heavy value add and opportunistic guy.
Mhm.
So personally, so what I'd like to do is number one, I always look at an apartment building and say, can I add more units into it?
Mhm.
Number one. Number two, can I add a story on top? Like, can I add a floor?
Mhm.
Number three, can I raise the property up and put maybe units in the basement?
Mhm. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, or like a half kind of basement thing. And number four, is this piece of land, like, is the property on this piece of land optimal for it? Like, um, I'm purchasing an 8-unit apartment building right now, and I'm paying way too much for it, like ridiculous amount.
Right.
But I know that the land is already zoned for a 28-unit apartment on it, so I'm just going to knock down the 8-unit and then build 28 units. So if you take the price I'm paying for it and divide it by 28 units, I'm really not paying a lot of money for that piece of land. But
Right.
I'm looking at it as a land deal and not as a multifamily, used apartment deal, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's changing the way you look at deals, and that's where I teach real estate and financial engineering. That's one of the big parts of it, is understanding how to create kind of new products and derivative products, and playing with capital stacks, playing with zoning laws, playing with all those types of kind of things that allow you to create value.
Right. Right. And then
Purchase at a price that is below intrinsic value,
right.
not
Right.
necessarily below actual value, but below intrinsic value. Very
Right.
different things.
Right. Right. Because the market is so competitive right now.
Yeah, for
It's
sure. You have to
competing
change
with
the
multiple
glasses that you're
factors.
looking at. You
Yeah.
can't look at the market with the same eyes that everyone else is looking at it.
Yeah. And then so let's kind of talk about the market a little bit more. Where are you investing? People always asking these questions, like, which is like, hey, like, where do you invest? You know, the most generic question I love is, where should I invest in which market, right? So, like, do you have kind of like an answer to that? Like, we'll have it. It might be all these knocking construction on your side, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool. All right. So, Nikolai, tell us a little bit about the markets. What do you
Yeah,
think about the markets and your theory about the
right,
market
right.
where you should be investing? Because that's always usually our investors' favorite questions.
So I think you have to keep in mind that multifamily real estate is very hyper local. So there are no bad and good markets. You can be in a bad market but still make good investments, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, do I like Phoenix, Arizona, and Dallas, Texas, and Tampa Bay, Florida more than I like Cleveland, Ohio, and Kansas City and Indianapolis? Yeah, of course I do. But does that mean I wouldn't invest in Kansas City or Cleveland or Baltimore? No, it doesn't. It just means that overall, the macro of those markets, I prefer their demographics. So yeah, I mean, definitely, I look at demographics and economics uh, before I enter a market. I like to see a market with good population growth or projected population growth, with jobs being created, salaries are growing. That's all stuff I like to see. Houses are increasing in prices, because if they are, that means more people with good salaries are actually going to be renting, which is good for increasing rents. So that's all stuff I like to look at. I like to look also like what type of economy is there. So I prefer markets with, maybe economies that are not just too focused on just one industry, that have many industries.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a way of looking at it. I myself personally, because I live near Montreal, I'm looking at like Canadian markets.
Mhm.
Right now, I've invested very heavily in a market called Sherbrooke, which is a
Mhm.
secondary city. It's about an hour south of Montreal. There are two universities and two colleges in the city. So I've invested. I've purchased 35. I think, yeah, probably pretty close to 35 properties in the last 15 months in that market. And I'm applying a monopoly effect. So I've purchased essentially like 30 properties in like a 2 mile radius in like the downtown core of that city that was a very bad area. But I've bought so many properties and I'm renovating all of them. So
Yeah.
I'm forcing myself. I'm the one forcing the appreciation of the market. It's
Right.
a monopoly effect.
Yeah.
So it's a very rare thing to do. I was able to do it, thankfully, because I have access to capital and I've had access to a lot of deals. For the U.S., I'll probably be entering, markets. I'm looking at Georgia and Florida a lot, and the Carolinas.
Mhm.
Just essentially for geographic reasons, because I split time between Montreal and Miami.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think people need to not get so knocked up in markets. Every market has good deals. Every
Mhm.
market, there are good places to invest.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of the way that I think about it.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Cool. So we're going to wrap up our interviews over here because there's so much we learned over here in terms of financings, and there's gazillion million different ways to do it. Tell us a little bit about your school, MREX.
Yep,
Like, what do you teach over there, and then what is kind of like the program works, and then can people actually join it?
absolutely. And actually, before that, I'm just thinking about the last question you asked me, and I forgot something. The one thing I would suggest is fall in love with the markets that you invest in. Like, that's the biggest piece of knowledge I can give someone, and that's like worth more than any course or certification or mentorship that you can go through. Is the market you decide to invest in, or the area that you decide to invest in a market, invest in understanding that market. So like where I've invested, I walk the streets all the time. I eat in all the restaurants. I go and shop in all the places around where I'm investing, and I get a feel for it. And I end up falling in love with where I'm investing, and I get invested into it. So I think that's a very important thing. So that's kind of the end of that. As
Yeah.
for the MREX College, I founded it 5 years ago in Canada, in Montreal. We've had thousands of multifamily investors and commercial investors come through our school. What we do differently is that we we're not a competitor to, say, the different coaching and mentorship programs that exist. Like, in the US, there's obviously Jake and Gino and Rod Khalif, Brad Sumrock. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and they're all, I think, very, very good. And I think it's important to get mentored and to get coaching. What we do is we're more of we bring you all the theoretical and tools and knowledge so that you can even get more out of your coaching. So if you're getting coached by one of these schools or programs or people, you should probably be studying with us as well, because we're going to give you even more knowledge to better apply the coaching that you're getting. And the coaching that you're getting is going to help you apply what we're teaching you. So we're much more kind of like you can see us as like a university, accessible to every single real estate investor. So even if you don't have a university degree already, or even if you don't want to go to university, you can come to us and you can learn with us through on-demand courses, through live courses. And no matter what your background is, whether you're a carpenter, whether you don't even have your grade 12 education, that's fine. You'll be able to come and study with us at the MREX College, learn the basics of finance and economics for real estate investing, and maybe even eventually learn real estate financial engineering, underwriting, modeling, how to read markets, and how to do all this stuff to help you become a better real estate investor, a real estate syndicator, or even an asset manager or property manager.
Yeah, makes sense. And then having your coach and tend to then kind of work on the specialized items of
Right, exactly.
And Nikolai, I know you have three cute little kids,
Yeah.
and
A fourth one on the way.
fourth one on the way. So what are you doing right now to kind of make sure that they inherit your entrepreneur spirits, and learning the financial literacy?
Well, I'm not actually trying to have them inherit my entrepreneurial spirit, because I think that, like, I think there's way too much made right now of everyone should be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to be a W-2 employee, go for it and do it really well. And I think, because if no one's a W-2 employee, there won't be any entrepreneurs, because no one will want to work for any of the businesses, right?
Yeah.
So I think, do you. Like, if you want to be an entrepreneur, do you. It's not an easy road. It's not always a fun road. Just as if you want to be an employee, do you, and be a great employee. So with my children, that's kind of what I'm teaching them, is like, not one is not better than the other. You don't have to do one or the other. Do you, and make sure that you're happy with what you're doing, and that you're invested entirely in what you're doing, be it as an entrepreneur or as an employee. And that's what I'm trying to, essentially show them. Now I take them with me, to my properties and to my businesses, and meet my employees and meet our clients, and so they can kind of see that. And then, what, they'll decide once they're adults what they want to do. And I think that's the biggest gift we can give our children, is just that one is not better than the other. We don't want to fall into that trap. And the important thing is that they're happy and that they are invested, because I don't think you can be happy if you're not fully vested into what you're doing,
Yeah.
whether as an employee or as an entrepreneur.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nikolai. And how do
Appreciate it.
people find you in terms of MREX and
Yeah,
then new products, the beta products that we've been kind of talking about?
absolutely. Well, I personally, you can connect with me on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm quite active there. You can connect with the MREX College, MREX, so MREX College, on
Yeah.
Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're going to be putting out more and more content in English. So I know we just started our YouTube channel, so definitely go there. And yeah, that's the best way to connect with us. We're all very down to earth people, very passionate about real estate investing and education. And I think if you're a real estate investor, especially the multifamily space, you don't want to miss you don't want to not follow us, because we share just so much, and we love what we do. So
Right, and I do. So that's all good. Awesome. So we'll put that in the show notes down here as well. So you don't have to actually remember what it is, as always. And thank you so much for your time, Nikolai, today. And looking forward to always chat with you again.
thanks a lot, Elisa. It's always a pleasure.